Lena Hayes wiped her hands on the apron tied around her waist and glanced at the clock above the diner's counter. It was just past 7 in the morning, and the sun had begun to peek over the rooftops of the sleepy little town. The air smelled like freshly brewed coffee and buttery pancakes, a comforting mix that welcomed anyone who stepped inside Lena's corner. The diner wasn't much, just a modest space with wooden booths lining the walls, a long counter running along one side, and a few tables scattered near the big glass windows. But it meant everything to Lena. She'd worked hard to keep it, going after her husband passed away 5 years ago. Every day she opened the doors early, greeted her regulars with a smile, and made sure they left feeling full and happy. This morning was no different. Joe Parker, an elderly man with thinning, gray hair and glasses perched on the tip of his nose, sat in his usual spot by the window. He liked watching the world go by as he sipped his black coffee. Across the room, Karen Blake, a single mother with 2 young kids, chatted softly while cutting up waffles for her son. The sound of forks clinking against plates and soft murmurs filled the air, creating a peaceful rhythm that Lena found soothing. As she refilled Joe's cup, he looked up and smiled. "You're the best part of my mornings, Lena," he said kindly. She chuckled, brushing a strand of curly black hair out of her face. "Don't let your wife hear you say that, Joe." "She knows," he replied with a wink before turning back to gaze out the window. For a moment, Lena paused behind the counter, letting herself take in the scene. This place was more than just a diner. It was home. For her, for Joe, for Karen, and for all the others who came here looking for good food and company. Over the years, she'd built something special, even if life hadn't always been easy. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden roar of an engine outside. Startled, she turned toward the window, squinting as a motorcycle pulled into the parking lot. Its rider wore leather gear, boots, and a helmet, making it impossible to see their face. The bike rumbled loudly as it came to a stop, breaking the quietness of the morning. Everyone in the diner seemed to notice too. Conversations hushed and heads turned toward the windows. Motorcycles weren't uncommon in this part of town, but there was something about this one that felt different. Maybe it was the way the rider dismounted with a sense of urgency, or how they hesitated before pulling off their helmet. When the helmet came off, revealing a scruffy face framed by messy dark hair, Lena recognized him immediately. Jake Malone, a member of the Hells Angels. His reputation preceded him. He and his crew were known for riding through town occasionally, though they rarely stayed long. Most people avoided them, whispering stories about trouble and danger whenever they passed by. Jake glanced around nervously, scanning the area as if expecting someone, or something, to appear. Then, without another moment's hesitation, he pushed open the diner door and stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully, contrasting sharply with the tension in the room. Everyone froze, unsure of what to do. Even Joe stopped sipping his coffee mid-sip, his eyes fixed on the newcomer. Jake didn't seem to notice, or maybe he didn't care. He walked straight to the back of the diner and slid into a booth, keeping his head low. Lena watched him carefully, trying to figure out why he looked so uneasy. Something wasn't right. "Can I get you anything?" she asked finally, approaching his table with a polite smile. He looked up, startled, as if he hadn't expected anyone to speak to him. For a second, their eyes met, and Lena saw something unexpected in his expression. Not anger or menace, but fear. "Coffee," he muttered, quickly avoiding her gaze. "Black." Nodding, Lena turned to fetch his order. As she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening here. Whatever it was, it had brought Jake Malone into her diner, and judging by the way he kept glancing toward the windows, it wasn't over yet. Just then, the peace shattered once again. Red and blue lights flashed brightly outside, reflecting off the glass windows. 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt in the parking lot, blocking the entrance. Officers spilled out of the cars, guns drawn, shouting commands that echoed through the stillness of the morning. Lena's heart sank. Trouble had arrived, and it seemed determined to find its way into her diner. The moment the police officers stormed into the diner, everything changed. The peaceful hum of conversation that had filled the air just moments ago disappeared completely. Now all that remained was silence. Thick, heavy, and suffocating. Everyone held their breath, unsure of what would happen next. Lena stood frozen, behind the counter, gripping the coffee pot tightly in her hand. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. She watched as Officers Steve Rogers and Mike Carter moved quickly, their boots thudding against the tiled floor. Both men were tall, broad-shouldered, and wore stern expressions on their faces. Their guns were pointed forward, sweeping across the room as they shouted for everyone to stay calm and keep their hands visible. "Nobody move." Officer Rogers barked, his voice sharp and commanding. At first, no one reacted. Then slowly, people began lifting their hands or placing them flat on the tables where the officers could see them. Joe Parker, still sitting by the window, raised, his trembling hands above his head, his coffee cup forgotten entirely. Karen Blake pulled her children close, whispering soothing words even though she looked terrified herself. But Lena's attention wasn't on the customers. It was on Jake. Malone. He hadn't moved since the officers entered, but now he shifted slightly in his seat, raising his hands cautiously. His expression was unreadable, though Lena noticed the tension in his shoulders. Whatever trouble he was running from, it had finally caught up with him. Officer Carter spotted Jake almost immediately. "There he is," he exclaimed, pointing toward the back of the diner. Both officers rushed forward, their guns trained directly on him. "This doesn't look good," Lena muttered under her breath. As the officers approached Jake, Lena stepped out from behind the counter. Her legs felt shaky, but she forced herself to move anyway. Something about this whole situation didn't sit right with her. Sure, Jake was a member of the Hells Angels, but he hadn't caused any trouble since arriving at the diner. If anything, he'd seemed more scared than dangerous. "You need to surrender peacefully," Officer Rogers ordered, stopping a few feet away from Jake's booth. Jake nodded slowly, keeping his hands raised. "I'm not resisting," he said, his voice steady despite the obvious fear in his eyes. "But I swear I didn't do anything wrong." Rogers sneered, clearly unconvinced. "Save it for the station." Before anyone could react, Lena spoke up. "Wait a minute," she said, firmly, stepping closer to the group. Both officers turned to glare at her, surprised by her sudden interruption. "Ma'am, stay out of this," Officer Carter warned, his tone icy. But Lena didn't back down. Instead, she crossed her arms over her chest and met their gaze head-on. "You can't just barge in here like this without explaining yourselves," she said. "What exactly are you accusing him of?" Rogers frowned, clearly irritated by her questions. "That's none of your concern. This man is wanted for questioning regarding a serious crime. Now step aside before you get hurt." Lena hesitated, glancing at Jake. His face was pale and sweat beaded on his forehead, but he gave her a slight nod, a silent plea for help. Taking a deep breath, Lena decided to trust her instincts. "He came in here peacefully," she argued. "He hasn't done anything to threaten anyone. You're scaring my customers, and you don't even have proof he did something wrong." Carter rolled his eyes. "We don't need your permission to do our job, lady. Stand down." Lena clenched her fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. She hated bullies, especially when they used their authority to intimidate innocent people. But she also knew she couldn't win this argument outright. Thinking quickly, she glanced around the room, searching for a distraction. Her eyes landed on the front door of the diner. It was still wide open, letting in the cool morning breeze. An idea formed in her mind, one that might give Jake a chance to escape. Without warning, Lena grabbed a nearby chair and swung it toward the counter. The loud crash startled everyone, including the officers. For a split second, all eyes turned to her, including Jake's. "Go," she hissed under her breath, gesturing subtly toward the kitchen door behind him. Jake hesitated, unsure if he should trust her. But when Rogers and Carter started moving again, closing the distance between them, he made his decision. Keeping low, he slipped out of the booth and darted toward the kitchen, disappearing through the swinging door just as the officers realized what was happening. "What the hell?" Rogers shouted, spinning around to confront Lena. She planted herself firmly in front of the kitchen door, blocking their path. "If you want to arrest someone, start with me," she said defiantly. "I won't let you bully an innocent man." Officers exchanged frustrated glances, clearly torn between chasing Jake and dealing with Lena. Meanwhile, the customers sat silently, too stunned to intervene. Finally, Rogers lowered his gun slightly, glaring at Lena. "You've made a big mistake," he growled. "This isn't over." With that, both officers turned and hurried out of the diner, presumably to search for Jake elsewhere. As soon as they were gone, Lena let out a shaky breath and leaned against the counter for support. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew one thing. Lena closed the kitchen door quietly behind her and leaned against it, listening intently for any sounds of pursuit. Her heart was racing so fast, she could feel it pounding in her ears. She glanced at Jake, who stood hunched over, trying to catch his breath. His face was pale and sweat dripped from his brow, but he managed a weak smile when he looked up at her. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "I owe you one." Lena shook her head, not wanting to hear gratitude right now. "Don't thank me yet," she replied sharply. "Those cops will be back once they realize you're gone. You need to get out of here, now." Jake nodded, straightening up slowly. He glanced around the cramped kitchen, taking in the shelves, stacked with cans, jars, and cooking utensils. A narrow window above the sink let in streaks of sunlight, illuminating the dust floating lazily in the air. Beyond the window, Lena noticed him eyeing the dense woods that stretched out behind the diner. "That way," she whispered, pointing toward the back door. "The forest will give you cover. Just keep moving until you're far enough away." For a moment, Jake hesitated. It was clear he didn't want to leave her alone to deal with the consequences of what had just happened. But then he squared his shoulders, determination flashing in his eyes. "I'll make this right," he promised. "You won't regret helping me." Before Lena could respond, he pulled open the door and slipped outside, disappearing into the trees. The cool morning breeze rushed in briefly before she shut the door firmly behind him. Taking a deep breath, she turned back toward the dining area, bracing herself for whatever came next. When she re-entered the diner, the tension in the room was palpable. Customers sat frozen in their seats, staring at her with wide eyes. Some looked confused, others scared, and a few seemed almost impressed by her boldness. Joe Parker still had his hands raised halfway, though his expression had softened into something resembling admiration. Karen Blake approached Lena cautiously, her two children clinging to her legs. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Lena forced a smile even though her nerves were fraying. "I'm fine," she assured her, "but we need to act normal. Pretend nothing unusual happened, all right? For everyone's sake." Karen nodded, understanding the unspoken message. Slowly, people began lowering their hands and returning to their meals, though the atmosphere remained uneasy. Lena walked back behind the counter and started tidying up, doing her best to project calmness despite the storm brewing inside her. It wasn't long before the front door burst open again, and Officers Rogers and Carter stormed back in, their faces red with frustration. They scanned the room quickly, their eyes narrowing when they realized Jake was nowhere to be found. "You helped him escape," Rogers accused, marching up to the counter. Lena met his glare without flinching. "He left on his own," she said evenly. "I didn't see where he went." Carter snorted. "Don't play dumb with us, lady. We know you're lying." "Prove it," Lena shot back, crossing her arms over her chest. Rogers stepped closer, leaning across the counter until his face was inches from hers. "This isn't over," he growled. "If we find out you're hiding him or if you try to warn him, we'll make sure you regret it." Lena didn't blink. "Go ahead and do your worst," she said coldly. "But unless you have evidence that I broke the law, there's nothing you can do to me." The officers exchanged frustrated glances, knowing she was right. Without another word, they turned and left, slamming the door shut behind them. As soon as they were gone, the diner erupted into whispers. People began talking amongst themselves, speculating about what had just happened and why Lena had risked so much to help a stranger. Joe Parker approached her, his usual gentle demeanor replaced with quiet seriousness. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "Even if it was dangerous." Lena sighed, running a hand through her curly black hair. I hope so, she admitted. But I don't know what's going to happen now. Those cops aren't going to let this go easily. Joe placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Whatever happens, you've got friends here. We'll stand by you. His words brought a small measure of comfort, but Lena knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Protecting Jake had put a target on her back, and she couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was only beginning. That night, as she locked up the diner and headed home, Lena replayed the day's events over and over in her mind. She wondered if Jake would manage to stay safe, if the cops would come back with more questions, or worse, if the real criminals would come looking for him. Despite her fears, one thought kept circling in her head. She'd done the right thing. And no matter what happened next, she wouldn't change a single decision. The next morning, Lena arrived at the diner before sunrise, just like she always did. She carried her keys in one hand and a travel mug of coffee in the other, yawning as she walked across the quiet parking lot. The air was crisp, and the sky was painted soft shades of pink and orange as the sun began to rise. It was peaceful, too, peaceful considering everything that had happened the day before. As she approached the front door, something unusual caught her eye. Dozens of motorcycles were parked neatly in rows, filling every available space in the lot. At first, Lena thought it might be some kind of event happening nearby, but then she noticed movement near the entrance. Two men stood by the door, both dressed in leather jackets adorned with patches marking them as members of the Hells Angels. Her heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" she asked aloud, more to herself than anyone else. One of the men stepped forward, tipping his head respectfully. "Morning, ma'am," he said in a deep voice. "We're here to see you." "To see me?" Lena repeated, confused. Before he could explain further, the door swung open and Jake Malone appeared. He looked much calmer today, though there was still a hint of exhaustion in his eyes. Behind him, the inside of the diner buzzed with activity. Tables were packed with bikers, all talking and laughing loudly. The smell of fresh coffee wafted out into the cool morning air. "Lena," Jake said, gesturing for her to come inside. "You should see this." She hesitated, unsure what to expect, but curiosity got the better of her. Stepping through the doorway, she stopped short, stunned by the sight before her. Nearly 200 bikers filled the tiny diner, spilling out onto the sidewalk and into the parking lot. They weren't causing trouble, far from it. Instead, they seemed to be enjoying themselves, sharing stories, eating pancakes, and drinking coffee. Some even waved or nodded when they noticed her standing there. What is all this?" Lena stammered, looking at Jake for answers. He smiled, clearly pleased with the turnout. "Word spread about what you did yesterday," he explained, "about how you stood up to those cops to protect me. My brothers wanted to show their appreciation and make sure no one gives you any trouble because of it." Lena blinked, processing his words. "So, they came here? All of them?" "Of them," Jake confirmed. "And more are probably on the way." Lena felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her, gratitude, disbelief, and a touch of anxiety. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not from people like the Hells Angels. But despite her initial unease, she couldn't deny the warmth spreading through her chest. These men, tough as they looked, had shown up to support her in a way she hadn't expected. Over the next hour, Lena worked tirelessly to keep up with the demand. Plates of food flew out of the kitchen faster than she could prepare them, and the coffee pot never seemed to stay full for long. Still, she didn't mind. There was something comforting about the energy in the room, even if it was chaotic. At one point, Jake pulled her aside, leading her to a quiet corner where they could talk without being overheard. "Listen," he said seriously. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I want you to know we're serious about protecting you. Those cops won't bother you again, not while we're around." Lena frowned, shaking her head. "I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me," she replied. "This isn't your fight." "It is now," Jake insisted. "You stuck your neck out for me when no one else would. That means something to us. To all of us." He gestured toward the crowd, and Lena saw nods of agreement from several bikers nearby. Their expressions were firm but kind, showing a level of respect she hadn't anticipated. "I don't know what to say," she admitted softly. "You don't have to say anything," Jake said with a smile. "Just let us help. Trust me, Lena, you earned this." As the morning wore on, Lena found herself relaxing a little more. The bikers weren't as intimidating as she'd imagined. In fact, many of them were surprisingly friendly, chatting with her regular customers and complimenting her cooking. Joe Parker even struck up a conversation with one of them, laughing about old motorcycle rides he used to take in his younger days. Karen Blake brought her kids back for breakfast, looking hesitant at first but quickly warming up to the atmosphere. Her son stared wide-eyed at the sea of leather-clad men, while her daughter shyly accepted a toy car offered by one of the bikers. By midday, the diner was buzzing with life. Lena realized that despite the craziness of the situation, she felt safer than she had in years. With the Hells Angels watching over her, it was hard to imagine anyone daring to cause trouble. Still, she knew the peace wouldn't last forever. Trouble had a way of finding its way back no matter how well prepared you were. For now, though, she decided to enjoy the moment. After all, how often did a small-town diner owner become the unlikely ally of an entire bike? Over the next few days, Lena learned more about Jake and the Hells Angels than she ever thought possible. They weren't just a bunch of tough guys riding motorcycles. They were a brotherhood, fiercely loyal to each other and anyone who earned their trust. And somehow, against all odds, Lena had earned theirs. Jake explained that the stolen weapons framing him belonged to a rival gang called the Iron Vipers. This gang had been trying to push into Hells Angels territory for months, using dirty tactics to provoke conflict. By planting evidence and blaming Jake, they hoped to spark a war between the two groups, weakening both sides so they could take over. "They're not just targeting us," Jake said one evening as he sat at the counter in the diner. "They're targeting people like you, innocent folks who get caught in the crossfire." Lena frowned, leaning on the counter. "So what do we do about it?" Jake hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "We find proof," he said firmly. "If we can show the cops where the real weapons are hidden, we can clear my name and shut down the Vipers once and for all." The plan sounded simple enough, but Lena knew it wouldn't be easy. The Iron Vipers weren't amateurs. They were dangerous, ruthless, and desperate to protect their operation. Going after them meant risking everything. Still, she couldn't sit back and let them win. Using connections within the biker community, Jake tracked down leads pointing to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was old, crumbling, and rarely visited by anyone except squatters and stray animals, or so it seemed. According to Jake's sources, the Vipers had turned it into a makeshift hideout, storing their illegal goods there until they could move them elsewhere. Late one night, Lena found herself standing outside the warehouse with Jake and a small group of Hells Angels. Her heart raced as she clutched her phone tightly, ready to record whatever happened inside. She hadn't planned on coming along, but Jake insisted she stay close in case things went south. "You've already done so much for us," he'd said earlier. "Let us handle the hard part. Just be ready to document everything." The door creaked loudly as they pushed it open, revealing a dark, cavernous space filled with shadows and dust. Crates and barrels were stacked haphazardly throughout the room, creating narrow pathways that twisted and turned like a maze. Lena stayed close to Jake, her eyes scanning every corner for signs of danger. It didn't take long to find what they were looking for. Near the far wall, partially hidden behind a stack of wooden pallets, was a collection of crates marked with symbols matching descriptions of the stolen shipment. As Jake examined them, Lena stepped forward, angling her phone to capture clear footage. Suddenly, voices echoed through the warehouse, followed by the sound of footsteps approaching quickly. Without warning, several men emerged from the shadows, their faces hardened and angry. They were armed with crowbars, pipes, and knives, clearly prepared for a fight. "Well, well," one of them sneered, stepping forward. "Look what we've got here. The Hells Angels decided to pay us a visit." Jake stepped in front of Lena, shielding her from view. "We don't want trouble," he said calmly. "We just want what belongs to you." The man laughed bitterly. "You think you can waltz in here and take what's ours? You've got guts, I'll give you that. Tension crackled in the air as both sides faced off, neither willing to back down. Lena held her breath, praying this wouldn't escalate into violence. But then Jake raised his hand slightly, signaling to his brothers to stay calm. "We're not leaving without proof," he said firmly. "Either hand it over peacefully, or we'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then, slowly, the leader of the Vipers nodded toward his men, who began backing away. "Fine," he spat. "Take your damn evidence, but this isn't over." As the rival gang disappeared into the darkness, Jake turned to Lena with a relieved smile. "Got it?" She nodded, lowering her phone slightly. "Every second." Together, they gathered the remaining crates and loaded them onto a truck waiting outside. By the time they returned to the diner, dawn was breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. Lena felt exhausted, but triumphant. For the first time since this whole mess began, she allowed herself to believe they might actually pull through. The victory at the warehouse felt short-lived. By the time Lena and Jake returned to the diner, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a gnawing sense of unease. They had the proof they needed, the stolen weapons and clear video footage, but it wasn't enough to shake the feeling that trouble was still brewing. That evening, after most of the bikers had left and the diner grew quiet again, Lena locked up and stepped outside to check the parking lot one last time before heading home. The air was cool, and the only sounds were the distant hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Everything seemed peaceful. Too peaceful. As she turned to head back inside, something caught her eye. Taped to the glass door of the diner was a piece of paper. Her heart sank as she pulled it off and read the message scrawled across it in blocky letters. "Stay out of our business." Lena stared at the note, her hands trembling slightly. It didn't take a genius to figure out who it was from. The Iron Vipers weren't happy about what had happened at the warehouse, and now they were sending a warning. She crumpled the note in her fist, anger bubbling beneath the surface. After everything she'd done to help Jake and his crew, she wasn't about to let some gang intimidate her into backing down. Still, fear crept in around the edges. These men were dangerous, and they clearly weren't afraid to make threats, or worse. The next morning, Lena showed the note to Jake when he arrived at the diner. His jaw tightened as he read it, his eyes darkening with concern. "This isn't good," he muttered, folding the paper and tucking it into his pocket. "They're testing us to see if we'll fold under pressure." "And what happens if we don't?" Lena asked, crossing her arms over her chest. Jake hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Then things could get ugly. But we can't let them win, Lena. If we do, they'll keep coming after us and anyone else who gets in their way." Lena nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. She trusted Jake and the Hell's Angels to protect her, but she couldn't ignore the risks. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the safety of everyone in town. Word of the threat spread quickly among the bikers, and soon the diner became a hub of activity once again. Plans were made, strategies discussed, and defenses prepared. Lena listened quietly as Jake and his brothers talked about how to handle the situation. They agreed that going to the police with the evidence from the warehouse was their best option, but they also knew it wouldn't stop the Vipers from retaliating. "They won't give up easily," one of the bikers said grimly. "We need to be ready for anything." By midweek, tensions in the town reached a boiling point. Officers Rogers and Carter paid another visit to the diner, this time accompanied by Sheriff Daniels, a stern-looking man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes. He questioned Lena closely about the events leading up to the discovery of the stolen weapons, clearly suspicious of her involvement with the Hell's Angels. "You've got quite the reputation lately," he said dryly, leaning against the counter. "Some folks think you're stirring up trouble." "I'm not stirring up anything," Lena replied firmly. "I'm just trying to protect myself, and my town, from people who don't care who they hurt." The sheriff studied her for a moment before nodding slowly. "Fair enough. But if I find out you're hiding something, you'll regret it." Despite the warning, the sheriff took the evidence seriously. Within days, the Iron Viper's hideout was raided, and several members of the gang were arrested. News of the bust spread quickly, bringing a mix of relief and apprehension to the town. While many celebrated the takedown, others worried about what the Vipers might do in response. Lena tried to focus on running the diner, but the weight of the situation pressed heavily on her shoulders. Every creak of the floorboards, or unfamiliar, sound outside made her jump. She started locking both the front and back doors even during business hours, something she'd never done before. One afternoon, Karen Blake came in with her kids, looking worried. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, glancing around the nearly empty diner. "I'm fine," Lena lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired." Karen didn't look convinced. "You've been through so much lately. You should think about taking a break, getting away for a little while." Lena shook her head. "This is my home. I'm not running because of some thugs." Karen sighed but didn't argue further. Instead, she placed a comforting hand on Lena's shoulder. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "I will," Lena promised, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Later that night, as she closed up the diner, Jake appeared unexpectedly. He leaned against his motorcycle, watching her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You've been incredible through all of this," he said finally. "But you shouldn't have to face it alone." "I'm not alone," Lena replied, gesturing toward the diner where lights still burned brightly inside. "I've got you guys, and my friends in this town. That's more than I ever expected." Jake smiled faintly. "Still, I want you to know something. No matter what happens next, we've got your back. Always." For the first time in days, Lena felt a flicker of hope. Whatever came next, she wouldn't have to face it alone. It didn't take long for the Iron Vipers to make their move. Late one night after the diner had closed, Lena was tidying up inside when she heard the rumble of engines outside. At first, she thought it might be Jake or his crew stopping by for a late-night visit. But when she peeked out the window, her blood ran cold. A line of unfamiliar motorcycles pulled into the parking lot, their riders clad in dark gear that marked them as members of the rival gang. Lena's heart pounded as she quickly locked the front door and turned off the lights. She grabbed her phone and dialed Jake's number, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. "Jake," she whispered urgently when he answered. "They're here. The Iron Vipers, they're outside." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Jake's voice came through, calm but firm. "Stay put. We're on our way." Before hanging up, he added, "And whatever you do, don't let them inside." Lena crouched behind the counter, clutching her phone tightly. Outside, the sound of boots crunching against gravel grew louder as the gang members approached the diner. They banged on the glass doors, shouting threats and demanding Lena come out. "We know you're in there," one of them yelled. "You've caused enough trouble." Lena forced herself to stay silent, her mind racing. She knew the diner wouldn't hold them off for long, not if they really wanted to get in. All she could do was wait and hope Jake arrived in time. Minutes passed like hours, each second stretching endlessly as the shouting outside grew angrier. Then, just as one of the men started kicking at the door, the roar of approaching motorcycles filled the air. Moments later, headlights flooded the parking lot, blinding the Iron Vipers and forcing them to retreat. Jake and a dozen Hell's Angels rode in, surrounding the diner like a wall of steel and leather. Their presence was immediate and intimidating, and the Iron Vipers hesitated, clearly outnumbered. "This is your last chance," Jake called out, stepping forward with authority. "Leave now, or we'll make sure you regret it." The leader of the Iron Vipers sneered, trying to mask his fear with bravado. "You think you can scare us? This isn't over." "It is for tonight," Jake shot back, his tone leaving no room for argument. For a tense moment, neither side moved. Then, with a frustrated growl, the leader signaled to his men and they mounted their bikes, speeding off into the night. As soon as they were gone, Jake rushed inside, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Lena. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern etched across his face. She nodded shakily, standing up from behind the counter. "I'm fine, thanks to you." "You don't have to thank me," Jake said gently. "We told you we'd always have your back." Over the next hour, the Hells Angels stayed in the parking lot, keeping watch to ensure the Iron Vipers didn't return. Inside, Lena made coffee for anyone who needed it, though her hands still trembled as she poured cups. Joe Parker arrived, unexpectedly having heard about the commotion from a neighbor. He carried a shotgun slung over his shoulder, though he admitted sheepishly that he probably wouldn't have known how to use it if things had gotten worse. "I couldn't just sit. At home," he explained, setting the weapon aside. "Not when you needed help." Lena smiled weakly, touched by his gesture. "Thank you, Joe. That means a lot." By morning, the town buzzed with talk of what had happened. Word spread quickly about how the Hells Angels had defended Lena's diner, and indirectly, the entire community, from the Iron Vipers. Some people were grateful, others remained wary of the bikers' involvement. But everyone agreed on one thing. Lena Hayes had shown incredible courage throughout the ordeal. Officers Rogers and Carter showed up again, this time accompanied by additional deputies. They questioned Lena and several of the bikers, clearly struggling to understand why the Hells Angels had chosen to protect her. "You realize this makes you look suspicious," Rogers said pointedly to Lena. "I don't care how it looks," she replied firmly. "All I care about is keeping my town safe. If that makes me suspicious, then so be it." The officers left without pressing further, though Lena suspected they'd continue investigating. That evening, Jake joined Lena in the diner, sitting at the counter while she cleaned up. The place was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of dishes being stacked away. "You've been through a lot," Jake said finally, breaking the silence. "But it's not over yet." "I know," Lena replied, pausing to look at him. "But I'm ready for whatever comes next. As long as I've got friends like you and everyone else in this town, I'll be okay." Jake smiled, his expression softening. "You've earned more than just friends, Lena. You've earned a family." For the first time in days, Lena felt a sense of peace. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew she wouldn't face them alone. Weeks passed, and life in the small town began to settle into a new kind of normal. The Iron Vipers were gone, arrested or scattered after their failed attempts to retaliate. With the stolen weapons recovered and evidence submitted, the authorities officially cleared Jake Malone and his crew of any wrongdoing. For the first time in months, the Hells Angels could ride without fear of being targeted by either the law or rival gangs. Lena's diner became busier than ever. Word had spread far and wide about what happened, drawing curious visitors from neighboring towns, who wanted to see the place where a brave woman stood up to both the cops and criminals. Some came out of admiration, others out of sheer curiosity, but all left impressed by Lena's warmth and hospitality. The bikers continued to frequent the diner, treating it like a second home. They weren't just customers, they were family, now. Every day they filled the booths and tables, sharing stories, jokes, and meals. At first, some of Lena's regular patrons seemed unsure about the sudden influx of leather-clad strangers, but it didn't take long for everyone to realize that these men weren't so different from anyone else. Beneath their tough exteriors were hearts full of loyalty and gratitude. Joe Parker often joined the bikers for breakfast, regaling them with tales of his younger days when he used to ride motorcycles himself. Karen Blake brought her kids almost daily, letting them marvel at the shiny bikes parked outside while she chatted with Lena over coffee. Even Officer Rogers stopped by occasionally, though he avoided making eye contact with Jake whenever possible. One sunny morning, Lena arrived at the diner earlier than usual. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee and buttery pancakes. As she flipped on the lights, she noticed something unusual: a bouquet of wildflowers sitting on the counter, tied together with a simple ribbon. Beside it was a note written in bold handwriting. "Thank you for everything." She smiled softly, recognizing Jake's handiwork. Over the past few weeks, he'd become a fixture in her life, always checking in to make sure she was okay. Though they hadn't spoken much about the future, Lena knew their bond would last a lifetime. As the morning went on, the diner filled with its usual mix of customers. Jake sat at his favorite booth near the back, nursing a cup of black coffee, while reading a newspaper. When Lena approached him, tray in hand, he looked up with a grin. "How's business today?" he asked casually. "Better than ever," she replied, setting down a fresh pot of coffee. I owe a lot of that to you, and your crew. Jake shook his head. You did this yourself, Lena. You're the reason people keep coming back. She chuckled, brushing off the compliment. Well, I couldn't have done it without my friends. The word felt strange on her tongue. Friends, but also right. In such a short time, her world had expanded in ways she never imagined. What started as an ordinary morning in a quiet diner had turned into a whirlwind of danger, courage, and unexpected alliances. And through it all, she'd discovered something invaluable: the strength of community. Later that afternoon, as the lunch rush slowed down, Lena stepped outside to take a break. Leaning against the railing, she watched the sunlight dance across the parking lot, highlighting the rows of motorcycles lined up neatly beside ordinary cars. It was a perfect picture of balance, a symbol of how two very different worlds had come together under one roof. Karen Blake joined her, holding a steaming cup of tea. You've really built something special here, she said warmly. This place feels alive again. Lena nodded, feeling a swell of pride. It's not just mine anymore. Everyone who walks through those doors makes it what it is. Karen smiled, glancing toward the bikers chatting animatedly inside. Even them? Especially them, Lena corrected with a laugh. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden hues over the town, Lena took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. Protecting Jake had been a risk, one that could have cost her dearly, but it had also opened doors she never expected. Her small act of defiance had sparked a chain reaction, bringing people together and proving that even in the face of fear, kindness and courage could prevail. That evening, as she locked up the diner and prepared to head home, Jake appeared once more. He leaned against his motorcycle, watching her with a thoughtful expression. You know, he said slowly, you've changed us as much as we've changed you. Lena tilted her head, intrigued. What do you mean? I mean, he continued, before you, we were just a bunch of guys riding bikes, looking out for ourselves. But now, we're part of something bigger, something real. Touched by his words, Lena simply smiled. I guess we all needed each other more than we realized. With that, Jake.